presentation already. Lloyd D, can you see the presentation? Reference and testing.
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So one of the methods, another method of employee selection is references and testing. So kung kanina, we dwell on recruitment and selection as process, interviewing, isa din sa dapat nating alam ay yung references and testing sa employee selection. When we talk about reference, it has something to do with the opinion of others as to the ability or the characteristics of a possible employee, the applicant, a possible employee of a company. So yung reference check, di ba sa resume ninyo, meron doong nakalagay na character references. You have to make sure that when you put their names, these are really credible persons and someone who can say something about you, about your qualifications. Kasi if we have recruitment and if we have the selection, yung mga HR, tinitignan yan, character references, nagkakaroon ng reference check, nagkakaroon ng verification, whether yung content ng resume mo ay tama at wala kang nilagay sa resume na hindi totoo. So it checks the veracity, it checks the truthfulness of the content of your resume, your application. So therefore, you have to be very cautious in writing names of those in the names that you included on the character references. Kasi nga, tinitingnan siya ng ating HR assigned to that. And another is the letter of recommendation. This one naman is different with reference check kasi sa reference check, tinatanong yung ating mga character references na nilagay doon sa ating resume. Yung letter of recommendation, meron na mismong nagbibigay doon sa company ng letter recommending, expressing the recommendation of a particular person na pwedeng fit doon sa trabaho. So magkaiba sila in the essence na yung reference check, yung HR yung nag-i-initiate ng pagtatanong, yung letter of recommendation, yung mismong nasa character reference mo o yung ibang tao, yung mismong nagpapasa ng letter of recommendation doon sa company. So ito ay tinitingnan in terms of selection. Meron din itong factor kasi one means of determining who you are or identifying whether you are really fit on the job ay yung iba, other people. Because others can see your ability, your performance, etc. Actually, sa reference, pwede mong ilagay yung dati mong employer, dati mong prof, dati mong teacher, ano pa, sino pa ba? Yung sigurado na may masasabi sa'yo. Sigurado na may maiibahagi for your promotion or for your hiring. And then, we have to avoid negligent hiring. Ano yung negligent hiring? Kaya natin ginagamit yung references and recommendations kasi nakikita natin doon whether yung applicant ay mayroong past, let's say, bad record sa company, past experiences before. So to avoid negligent hiring, tinitingnan natin yung mga opinion ng iba, the references, recommendations of others pertaining to the person or to the applicant. Of course, also, aside from the past experience, the HR staff or personnel can also look into the reference and recommendation as a means to discover the future performance. Kasi kung nakalagay doon, yung mga characteristics ay magaganda, very qualified siya dun sa job, baka doon sa mga susunod na panahon na magpe-perform siya ng certain responsibilities relative to dun sa job ay magagawa niya ng maayos. There are 4 main problems with references and recommendations. Leniency, kasi lahat naman ng sinasabi sa reference check and letter recommendations magaganda. So hindi mo na minsan ma-determine kung ano ba talaga yung hindi naman, no one's is perfect, but it adds something to your hiring or your promotion. Kaya lang yun nga, minsan, dahil gusto natin na ma-hire or ma-promote yung tao, kaya mo siya ni-recommend or kaya siya yung ni-refer mo, ay nawawala yung negative side ng tao. Nagiging very lenient ba? Nawawala yung ibang idea or source or information about the person. Kasi syempre, wala namang magsasabi ng mapangit pag ikaw ay nag-recommend or nag-refer. That's one of the problems. Another, knowledge of the applicant. Minsan may mga letter of recommendations and reference na hindi mo naman kilala. Talaga yung nire-refer mo. Pero dahil hiningan ka ng references or hiningin ka ng recommendations, kahit wala kang alam dun sa applicant, inaano mo, nire-recommend mo siya sa company. Sa akin nangyayari to, kaya sabi ko dun sa mga estudyante ko, sabihan nyo naman ako kapag nilagay nyo ako sa character references kasi minsan, hindi ko naman kilala. I had and have a lot of students. Hindi ko na makabisa kung ano yung mga pangalan. Siguro kilala ko sa mukha, yung iba naalala ko yung pangalan. Biglang may tatawag and then itatanong kung kilala ko to, kilala ko yung anong klaseng estudyante siya, anong klase siyang tao, how can I answer if I'm not aware? So, it's one also of the main problem kasi minsan, yung nilalagay natin doon sa resume or nilalagay ng applicant ay hindi naman talaga kilala yung applicant. So, ang nangyayari, nag-iimbento, no? Nagsasabi na lang ng ano man na makakatulong sa kanyang hiring and promotion. Hindi na talaga na-consider yung actual behavior ng applicant na talagang fit, qualified for a certain position. And then problems with reliability. There is more agreement between the two recommendations written by the same person for two different applicants than between two people writing recommendations for the same person. So there is actually lack of agreement between two people who provide references for the same person. Usually, we provide 2 to 3 character references. And the question is how reliable the answers of those two kung hindi naman sila magkakilala or kung hindi naman talaga nila kilala yung kanilang nire-refer at nire-recommend. And then extraneous factors, yung actual content ng letter, it affects the reference and recommendations doon sa employee. So, dapat yung magbibigay ng recommendation sa inyo or reference ay magaling din magsulat, magaling magsalita. And sabi doon sa isang study, the longer the recommendation letter, the more positively the letter was perceived. Which is something na bias kasi what if ang laman naman ay kung ano-ano, no? Pero anyway, that is a result of a research na the longer the recommendation letter, the more positive yung effect niya or yung naiibigay niya na impression doon sa HR. So dapat ay maganda yung letter, maayos, malinis, pag yung reference sa referencing, nakaka-affect din syempre yung pagsagot, noong sasagot, noong tatawagan, and whatsoever. So, these are 4 main problems with references and recommendations kasi, yun nga, may outside person who will be asked of your characteristics, let's say as an applicant or an employee. Excuse me. So, a while ago, we discussed references and recommendations, the main problems to it, and the things that we have to consider. Also, ethical issues in references. So there are 3 ethical guidelines that reference providers should follow. First, we have to, state your relationship with the person you are recommending. So, dapat hindi mo kapatid, hindi mo pinsan, hindi mo kamag-anak. Siyempre, ethical. Kasi, if you will include on the character reference or recommendation someone who are family of course, meron ng bias dun sa information na maiibigay. So it would be better to include the relationship to really show na walang personal connection, ikaw at saka yung nagre-refer sa'yo or nagre-recommend. Also, the HR look into that. Kasi syempre, kapag ang nag-recommend ay pamilya, so automatic, maganda yung kanyang recommendations, maganda yung kanyang pagre-refer dun sa tao, at hindi na maganda yung impression noong HR doon kasi family. So excluded na agad. Be honest in providing details. Honesty, of course, is the best policy, and we want to, let's say, an employee or an applicant would want to become part of the company, at least be honest with ano talaga yung characteristics, ano talaga yung traits that you possess that are required to become part of the company. And then let the applicant see your reference before sending it and give him or her the chance to decline to use it. The procedure is for the applicant and reduces the referee's liability for any defamation charges. So dapat yung mga reference natin ay bago pala ibigay yung mga recommendation letters, reference checks, ay dapat sinasabi muna sa applicant para aware din yung applicant of whatever you will mention or you will declare doon sa HR staff or HR supervisor or whoever that is in charge of the selection. Reference providers pala ito. Reference providers. So yung nagbibigay ng reference or nagbibigay ng recommendation, nagre-refer or nagre-recommend doon sa applicant. So, dapat ay sabihin kung anong relationship mo dun sa tao, be honest, and before sending the reference and the recommendation, inform the applicant of the content. Now, there are ways on how we could predict performance. I will just go over with this. Predicting performance using the applicant's education. What do you think? Is GPA a good predictor of employee performance? Yes or no? Of course, there are different answers to this one, but the academic standing is a good source on how we can look into the future performance of an employee. Siyempre kapag matataas yung grades, may impression na nabibigay sa HR staff, interviewer, or supervisor, o kung sino mang assign sa selection, na maganda yung kanyang magiging performance eventually. Kasi kung nung estudyante siya ay nakakapagbigay na ng magandang output sa kanyang teachers or professors, there may come a point that when that person became part of the company, maganda rin yung performance na maibibigay niya. Kaya nga dapat, sana, maganda yung inyong mga grades kasi maganda yung panghatak or nakaka-influence for a company or employer to hire you. Aside from education, the job knowledge test, is it a good predictor of employee performance? Of course, if you are knowledgeable of the job, alam mo kung ano yung job context, working conditions, tools and equipment na gagamitin, there are tests to measure the knowledge on a particular job, it could be a predictor of a good employee performance. Kasi alam mo yung trabaho mo. So, alam mo kung anong ginagawa mo. So, it can predict employee performance. How about ability test? Is it a good predictor of employee performance? Also, it is a good predictor of employee performance kasi ability has something to do with your capacity to do things, your ability to learn, let's say, things na hindi, competencies na hindi, wala ka pa at this point. So, pwede rin siyang mag-predict ng employee performance. Madali pala siyang turuan. Meron pala siyang ability na mag-lead. So, may chance siya na maging supervisor, maging leader, and it can be brought on the performance that he or she will give for the company. There are various ability tests that we can identify: cognitive, perceptual, psychomotor, physical. Ayan. How about work samples and assessment centers? Are these good predictors of employee performance? Yung work samples, ito yung mga sample of work or output niya, let's say, from the previous position, previous job, or sa actual position niya ngayon, task niya, makikita mo doon, maganda yung kanyang ginawa, na-meet niya yung target o yung goals ng isang company, pwede siyang mag-predict ng performance ng, of course, ng employee. Kasi kung nagagawa niya, nami-meet niya yung goals ng company, nami-meet niya yung, let's say, yung quota, halimbawa sa pagbebenta, sales, edi it will bring an idea na, it's a good performance. Kung ako HR, ako assigned sa selection, makikita ko yung mga work sample, let's say, psychometrician. May sample siya ng psychological evaluation report. And then, i-evaluate ko, marunong siyang gumawa. Ikalawa, maayos siyang gumawa. So, kung ganito yung pinapakita mong sample sa HR, personnel, in charge with the selection, it will give an impression na that would be also your performance when you become part of the company. Yung assessment centers naman, meron tayong mga ginagawa for the employees na mga simulations, in the actual situation, kung ganito yung gagawin niya, ito ba ay pwedeng mag-predict din ng good performance ng isang empleyado soon? Let's say, for example, may mga situational cases na ganito yung mangyayari sa company, how will they act, how will they behave, how will they manage? Will it predict performance, good performance? Yes, because it can provide the HR personnel or the ones in charge with selection ng decision-making skills ng isang tao in a given situation, ano yung gagawin niya. So, ganito din in the future, siya magpe-perform sa company. So, the work sample, assessment centers, okay. I will run through this. And then, biodata. Biodata ba is a good predictor of employee performance? Biodata is somehow similar with the resume. Kung titingnan lang natin, yung biodata is much informal with the resume. Pwedeng sulat kamay, pero ang content is most likely almost the same with the resume. I remember when I first applied for a job, yung biodata pinagsulat, pinag-fill up ng biodata during the selection process. The way you write something on the biodata also contribute to the impression that you can give or provide to the employer. So, dapat iwasan mong magbura, iwasan mong magusot yung papel na ibibigay sa'yo, at maayos yung content ng iyong biodata. The question is it a good predictor? Yes, kasi the biodata possesses your qualifications, your traits. Kung ikaw ay, halimbawa, tapos ng high school and ang job na ina-applyan mo, ang isa sa requirement ay tapos ng high school, siguro may magagawa kang mga bagay na kaya ng isang high school graduate at appropriate para dun sa job na ina-applyan mo. It will give an impression na magagawa mo yung mga tasks relative to the position you're applying for by looking at your biodata. Kasi meron din doon nakasulat, halimbawa ay ilang magkakapatid, ano pa bang mga pwedeng nakalagay sa biodata. Work experience, if you are able to work in a company before, let's say, a center before, center ka ulit nag-a-apply ngayon, different center. Kung tumagal ka doon sa center na yon, as let's say as a psychologist, and matataas yung iyong rating na nakuha or nagtagal ka na lang muna, nagtagal ka dun sa company na yon, it may give an impression na makakapag-provide ka din ng good performance dito sa another center that you are applying. Ayan. So there are blanks, may mga questions. So it's a good predictor of employee performance. Para din siyang resume. Okay. I will skip on this. How about personality, interest, integrity tests? Will it predict performance? Yes, it can also predict performance. Personality, what kind of person you are. Let's say you are assigned as supervisor. So dapat ang personality mo, it's more of autocratic, authoritarian, someone who can motivate, who can influence people. Kung may ganun kang personality, definitely you can provide a good performance. Your interest also plays a vital role with your performance. Pag gusto mo yung iyong ginagawa, if they measure ay yung interest, syempre, it can contribute to a good performance. Gusto mo yung ginagawa mo eh. Na-measure yan with different kinds of psychological tests, personality, interest, and you can identify if ano ba yung interest ng tao na to, ito bang job na kanyang pinasukan ay something that he or she is interested with. And eventually, pag nagawa siya ng trabaho or nagtrabaho siya, ginawa niya yung responsibilities niya na relative to that position, di magagawa niya ng maayos. Integrity tests also are good predictors of employee performance. Integrity means what? Honesty, the pride in doing things. Syempre kapag pumasok ka sa isang company and then you set your mind that you are part of the company, you are there to meet the objectives and the goals of the company, you have that identity that you are an employee, of course you are going to perform well. You will do good for your job kasi meron kang perception that you are part of the company. You have that integrity with you na you belong to a particular company. There are inventories that we can use to test the possible performance of the person, as well as with integrity and interest. Another, the use of medical and psychological tests, will it predict performance? Yes. Medical, halimbawa ay sakitin, tapos ang trabaho ay require physical effort. Of course, you can foresee na hindi niya magagampanan ng maayos ang kanyang trabaho kasi meron siyang medical issues or concern. Kaya nga, bago magkaroon ng placement ng isang tao sa company, tinitingnan, di ba, kung physically fit siya. And of course, psychologically fit doon sa trabaho. Kasi it will affect the performance and how the person performs or manage the job that he or she has. So yung drug testing, it is one of the most controversial methods used by HR personnel. Bakit ba kailangang mag-drug test? Kasi syempre kapag under the influence of drugs, baka hindi makapagtrabaho ng maayos, hindi pumasok araw-araw, and they are more likely na mag-quit dun sa trabaho or ma-fire sa trabaho dahil sa kanilang behaviors brought about by drug use. So, important yung drug testing in terms of the selection of employees. Psychological exams naman, ito yung magiging trabaho ninyo sooner or later when you take the board exam and you become licensed psychologists. So ito ba ay malaki ang bearing sa selection? Yes, kasi may mga bagay na hindi nakikita sa interview, naririnig sa interview na pwede nating mag-gather through different psychological exams. If the applicant fails the exam, the offer is rescinded. So, meron daw mga employers na nagbibigay ng psychological exams after a conditional offer of hire has been made. So, isa sa reason bakit i-hire yung empleyado ay dahil sa psychological exams. Actually, if I am going to reflect on different companies that I know, nagre-require talaga sila ng psychological exams because they have to know whether the possible employee is psychologically fit nga or wala siyang gagawin na ikasasama ng company. Baka siya ay danger kapag source of danger siya kapag ipinasok siya sa company, edi hindi natatanggapin, hindi ba? Ayun. Medical exams, many employers require that a medical exam be taken after a conditional offer of hire has been made. So, ibig sabihin, ang medical exam ay pinapagawa doon sa mga tao na most likely ay hired na doon sa company. Kaya lang, conditional pa yung hiring sa kanya. Siyempre, kapag may lumabas na something negative doon sa medical examination, that could be a possible reason why the person cannot be hired in a given position or in a company. Let's say, for example, isang teacher, though hindi tayo nagfe-face to face, pero kapag ang isang teacher na applicant teacher, ay nalaman na may tuberculosis or TB sa medical exam, automatic, hindi siya pwedeng tanggapin. Kahit na pasado siya sa mga tests na binigay ng HR, kahit na very impressive siya sa interview, kahit na napasa niya lahat ng psychological exams, kung meron siyang TB, hindi siya pwedeng tanggapin as teacher. I think it also follows and applies still today kahit na online yung platform na ginagamit. Ang taong may TB ay bawal maging teacher. Ano pa ba ang mga sakit? Siyempre yung mga may, let's say, may HIV. And then ang ina-apply ang trabaho ay nurse. Ina-apply ang trabaho ay nurse na lang. Of course, the nurse cannot be hired because of that medical condition kasi baka magtutusok and whatsoever, the danger that can be brought noong condition ng applicant doon sa company or sa institution. But this medical exam is specially used for jobs requiring physical exertion. Pero very, very important, dapat ikaw ay medically fit, psychologically fit. Isa ito sa tinitingnan during the selection. It's not just about you pass the interview, pass the different tests, but you have to be psychologically and medically fit. So comparison of selection techniques, which method is the best? If we look at the validity, poor daw ang predictive validity ng unstructured interview, education, interest inventories, and some personality tests. And ang mas maganda na gamitin daw natin for selection are the ability tests, work samples, assessment centers, biodata, and structured interviews to determine whether the persons will perform well on a job that they are applying for. Bakit naging poor yung predictive validity ng unstructured interview? Kasi nga walang flow yung iyong questioning, and then baka yung ibang questions wala namang kinalaman dun sa future performance noong applicant. Education, according to this one, is also poor in terms of predictive validity kasi pwede naman na ang isang tao na maraming bagsak noong college, halimbawa, ay makapag-perform well doon sa kanyang job na ina-applyan. Okay. Interest inventories also have poor predictive validity. So, yung minsan nadadaya. Same with the personality tests na it can be answered kasi during the time, yung impression kasi na mabibigay mo dun sa test ay depende doon sa time kung kailan mo kinuha yung test. So, maaaring you are not on the mood today, you are not on proper disposition today, kaya ganun yung lumabas na sagot mo, interest mo, personality mo, that cannot be a good predictor of possible performance mo once na ikaw ay natanggap sa trabaho. So maganda na ito yung mga bagay na gamitin natin para ma-determine kung sino talaga yung chosen one o sino yung dapat i-hire sa isang company. Ability test niya, kaya niya bang gawin yung mga job relative to the job. Then the work samples, assessment centers, the biodata, and the structured interviews. Which combination of selection technique is the best? According to Skimid and Hunter, it appears that the most valid selection battery includes cognitive ability test and work sample, integrity test, and structured interview. However, much more research is needed on this topic. Keep in mind also that even though some selection techniques are better than others, all are potentially useful methods for selecting employees. Siguro it will just depend on how the HR assigned with selection manage to perform these methods and ano ba yung posisyon na tinitingnan nating lalagyan natin ng empleyado o ng applicant. Employee selection is like fishing trip by the late industrial psychologist Dan Johnson. We can try to catch a huge fish to make our meal, or we can catch several small fish that make the same size meal as one large fish. With selection tests, we try for one or two tests that will predict performance at a high level. But by combining several tests with smaller validities, we can predict performance just as well as with one test with a high or a very high validity. So it would be better to combine different selection methods in order for us really to select the best among the rest, the best among all the applicants who applied for a certain position. Then we have the legal issues, methods with low levels of adverse impact, integrity tests, references, low impact personality inventories, and with high level of adverse impact, cognitive ability tests, and GPA. In terms of face validity, applicants perceive interviews, work samples, and simulations as being the most job-related fair methods, whereas graphology, integrity tests, and personality tests as being the least job-related fair. Graphology is yung sa hands, sa writing, yun daw ay poor when it comes to determining job-related issues and concerns. Now, it's not just about selection. There are times that we need to reject applicants. And isa ito sa bagay na kailangang pag-aralan. Let's say you want to venture on IO setting or human resource. How will you reject applicants? So it must be done properly because you never know. Baka yung applicant na yon ay sa susunod, kailangan mo pala siya, hindi mo siya maayos na na-reject. Wala nang chance to become part of the company. And also, the applicant can be a potential client, customer of your company. So rejecting an applicant should be done properly. You should send a rejection letter, a letter from an organization to an applicant informing that he or she will not receive a job offer. Unfortunately, in the Philippines and most of the companies, nawawala itong rejection letter. Parang ang nangyayari ay kapag hindi ka tinawagan, edi hindi ka tanggap. Parang ganun yung nangyayari. Yun yung napansin ko din sa mga companies dito sa Philippines na parang ang haba ng proseso, recruitment pa lang and then selection and then after the decision, yung nasa decision making na, hindi mo alam if you're rejected or accepted. Of course, when you are accepted, alam mo kasi tatawagan ka, no? So parang papakiramdaman mo na lang kapag reject ka sa isang position na in-applyan mo. So as future HR personnel, kapag naman may recruitment and selection, may mga taong hindi natatanggap, nire-reject. It would be better to send rejection letter para naman alam noong tao na hindi pala siya tanggap. Explain bakit hindi siya natanggap. And of course, it's also a thing na feel sorry kasi you feel sorry for rejecting the person, pero you have to give the explanation why there is a need to reject the person. So guidelines in rejecting an applicant: send a rejection letter. Don't send the rejection letter immediately. Wag naman yung after ng interview, ni-reject mo na agad. At least give time, baka magbago pa yung isip ng panel or ng group. And then be as personable and specific as possible in the letter. Appreciate them for applying dun sa trabaho, but also be specific bakit nga siya hindi na-hire. More importantly, be honest. Do not tell applicants that their resumes will be kept on file if the files for each job opening will not be used. Lagi ko itong naririnig, tatawagan ka na lang po namin kapag may bakante na. Parang pinapaasa, no, yung applicant. Don't be like that. At least be honest. Nireject mo na nga siya eh. So, kung nireject mo siya, edi totally reject the person, hindi yung nagpapaasa pa. So, it's a challenge to the HR personnel, the future HR personnel, to reject an applicant properly. Ayun, that would be all for this one, for references and testing. Any question, I will post this on our Google Classroom, and I might also send another video for that topic because it's too long. We have limited time. I will stop the recording. If you have questions after I stop the recording, you may ask them. Thank you.